Great. Well, for those of you jumping in right now, we're going to go ahead and hold off for just another minute or so. Let go to webinar. Place you all in the queue here. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and on out. Here we go. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at our webinar today. My name is Katie Patterson, and I'm the American Farmland Trust California Policy Manager. AFT is excited to bring together policy experts and experts in conservation agriculture to share insights in the midst of this pandemic. But before I introduce our speakers, I want to share a little bit about American Farmland Trust, its work in California, and its response during this pandemic. As a note, we are recording this webinar and we'll post this soon after our event. We will attempt to answer any questions you may have, time permitting, after our presenters' presentations. Additionally, if you have any technical problems, please use the chat feature so that our staff may attempt to resolve the issues. For those of you unfamiliar with AFT, our mission is threefold: to protect farmland, to enhance environmental stewardship, and to advance support to farmers and ranchers, especially new or traditionally underserved producers across the country. In California, we are deeply committed to farmland protection, climate resiliency, and efforts to promote resources in San Joaquin Valley. Notably, AFT was recently awarded a $10 million grant by USDA through its Regional Conservation Partnership Program to expand our conservation work over the next 5 years with several partners in the San Joaquin Valley. AFT and partners matched this award with $14 million for an overall investment in $24 million in the Valley. During the onset of this pandemic, AFT recognized the incredible exposure facing small and medium-sized farms and ranches. To assist these vulnerable farmers and ranchers during this crisis, AFT established the Farmer Relief Fund, a fund where 100% of all donations go directly to recipients. To date, AFT has fundraised and granted over 1,000 farmers and ranchers, each with $1,000 grants. Still, the need is great, and AFT will continue to fundraise for this effort to reach additional farmers and ranching families. Another area that AFT has responded has been through the creation of a new video series called Farming in a Pandemic. If you haven't seen these yet, I highly recommend you do. AFT has started a conversation across the country with several key voices in agriculture, sharing their stories and words on how the pandemic has shifted their thinking and operations. These have been powerful conversations that AFT is excited to share that help piece together so many different perspectives and experiences during these remarkable times. So this afternoon, you're going to hear from several experts. The first to join us today is Tim Fink, AFT's Federal Policy Director. Tim joined AFT in 2019 and heads AFT's federal strategic policy interactions and collaborations with Congress and the administration. Before joining AFT, Tim was the Director of Research and Policy Analysis at the Supporters of Agricultural Research Foundation, where he advocated for increases in USDA's Agriculture and Food Research Initiative. He also fundraised for the National Academy's Science Breakthroughs 2030 project and led the development of a series of Farm Bill research policy recommendations. Tim also brings extensive background in leading collaborations on climate change and rural renewable energy policies. Thank you for joining us today, Tim. So Tim, can you share what the mood's been like in Washington, D.C. these past few weeks and what tangible responses have been put into motion?
Absolutely, and thank you, Katie, and thank you everyone for having me today. Appreciate it. If I were to sum up in a word, that word is confusion. DC has been called the land of confusion, and it's more so than ever. And it's confusion not just in terms of what is the impact of recent legislation, It's what is needed. What is the best way to provide what is needed? And what is the process through which they're going to do that? And so I figured I'd actually start by talking a little bit about the biggest step that Congress took, the CARES Act. Go to the next slide. So the CARES Act was the legislation that was passed in March 27, 2020, and it provided over $2 trillion in relief and other measures to address COVID. And it was the single largest recovery or stimulus bill that we've had in American history. Now, AFT's primary focus was on making sure there was these local market producers were included as part of the package. And we're, of course, concerned about all farmers, but those we're especially concerned about because they usually stand outside of USDA the safety net, the programs that they have. And they also don't necessarily have huge trade groups out there that can help to advocate on their behalf. You saw some of the work we were doing on the relief fund. When it comes to USDA, there were two specific tranches, pools of money that were passed as part of the legislation. First is $14 billion that went to this thing called the Commodity Credit Corporation. This is the mechanism that's been used by USDA to provide about $23 billion since the beginning of the administration. And that was actually provided to offset some of the challenges that growers were experiencing because of trade. You can see that I've included some of the eligible commodities. California has been middle in the pack in terms of receiving this. It's going to be easier for USDA to administer this, and checks related to this are expected to come out in July. The $9.5 billion has been really where a lot of the focus has been, both in terms of the advocacy community and in terms of USDA. If you're wondering how USDA created a $9.5 billion program over the span of a week, the answer is they didn't. They left it largely to USDA to try to administer that. And the language from Congress just says includes. It includes specialty crops. We're happy to see the local food systems, livestock, and dairy. But that meant that USDA has had an incredible challenge trying to figure out how they're going to dispense that funding, particularly to groups that don't necessarily receive that funding. California legislators have been especially concerned about the role of specialty crops in it, concerned that they're going to cap the amount that individual farms can receive, which will just simply not be enough. I mean, at the end of the day, this 9.5 pales in comparison to what is needed in the agricultural community. So there's a lot of different groups fighting for that funding. And it's actually quite possible that those local producers could be left out. We're still waiting to hear additional details. The goal is to get the checks out in this program by the end of May. You've also probably heard about some of the Small Business Administration programs. The Paycheck Protection Program has been one of the major ones, covers payroll for 2 months. Basically, there was a lot of challenges in getting that out, confusion. Ag is eligible for this program. Ag was slow to get that funding because a lot of the banks in ag aren't accustomed to working with that, working with the Small Business Administration. And then also, from a California angle, this is particularly important. Temporary agricultural labor was not included as part of the labor in this package, so that's important. I'm actually going to skip over the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program right now. I'll just note that originally in CARES, it was not included, and then subsequent legislation actually allowed agriculture to be eligible. So next slide. I think the question that we're all asking is what comes next? And I put together a slide here to show a little bit about what the House Democrats are thinking and what the Senate Republicans are thinking. I want to be very clear that this is not monolithic. You know, different Democrats have different feelings, different Republicans have different feelings. So this is basically an attempt to speak in shorthand. First of all, the Democrats want another immediate action on legislation. They feel left out of the previous 2 rounds on the House side, whereas the Senate Republicans really want to see what happens through the CARES funding. As we mentioned earlier, some of that funding hasn't even been administered yet. Second, House Democrats want to see an increase in SNAP benefits as opposed by the Senate Republicans. They want to see funding for states and local governments. This is a huge issue for California. There's going to be huge revenues and many revenue downfalls in a lot of states. And really the federal government's kind of the last resort in order to boost that funding. Republicans, some of them have indicated that they are against this, but it's difficult for them to sustain that because a lot of Republican governors are very concerned about this as well. Democrats want additional emergency funding. Senate Republicans want to make sure that you can't sue your employer if you go to work suddenly come down with COVID. One thing I didn't talk about was agriculture, and that's next. So agriculture is kind of interesting because it doesn't break down into left, right, blue, red. It really breaks down into what the commodities are in an individual region. Right now, there is no Democratic ag plan. There is no Senate ag plan. and you're getting different things from different people. The chairman of the House committee said basically he will not endorse another piece of legislation unless Congress has much more control over how that funding is spent. Other people just want to see USDA provide more direct payments. So there is no alignment there. Next slide, please. Another thing that's interesting, and you see my what's after what's next, is most likely the next legislation is going to be in the next 2 months. And it's also most likely that it's going to focus on relief. There's eventually going to come a situation where we're going to start talking about not just relief, we're going to talk about how do we rebuild and rebuild stronger. And that's the part that's one of the most interesting conversations when we shift from relief to stimulus. Next. Now, in terms of what American Farmland Trust is presenting for ideas for Congress, one is really focused again on those local direct market producers. We're recommending an additional SNAP benefit. This is based on a program that started in Massachusetts. It's a SNAP benefit that can only be spent at farms, farmer stands, farmers markets, and basically increases the purchasing power of consumers while simultaneously providing a market for a lot of these farmers who've lost their markets. Also increasing the local agricultural market program to help some of these producers adapt. But I mentioned the interest in stimulus. Can we provide relief while also achieving other public aims? Can we protect the land? Easements have a lot of potential on that end. Agricultural conservation easements. We recommend a debt for working lands program where you could essentially exchange FSA loan debt for an agricultural conservation easement. There's also the ASIP program, which provides agricultural conservation easements. Perhaps a carve out that focuses on something called buy, protect, sell, which is literally what it sounds like. It's when a land trust or a state buys a piece of land, they protect it, and then they sell it off, perhaps at a later date. The problem is when you have the agricultural economy suffering as much as it is right now, that land could potentially be in jeopardy in addition to those farmers. We want to make sure we're able to protect as much of that land and protect as many of those farmers as possible. We're also interested in finding ways to use a tax code to try to transfer land to the next generation. We imagine like a capital gains exclusion for young, beginning, and disadvantaged farmers. And also interested in, if you want to dream big, connecting either debt relief or connecting additional payments to farmers for things like regenerative agriculture, finding so many different ways for all hands on deck at USDA, NRCS, for them to focus on basically bringing everything together that they can, whether it be the crop insurance system, which has been used in some states to incentivize the adoption of cover crops, whether it be a transition insurance that could protect farmers as they learn these new practices from making losses. So now is really a time for us to not just think about what's needed now, but a time for us to dream of what's coming next. I think I'll stop right there. I want to thank you for your time and look forward to your questions.
So much for joining us, Tim. Clearly it's a dynamic situation and we appreciate you being there in DC to help support our work as American Farmland Trust, but also our supporters out here and bringing this information. Next, I'd like to bring the conversation back to the state level and introduce Mary Kaems, Principal Consultant for the Assembly Speaker's Office. And she's going to share the latest of what's going on in Sacramento. But first, Mary is a policy consultant to the Assembly Speaker Rendon. Her portfolio includes agriculture, jobs, and economic development, along with arts and entertainment issues. Mary also staffs the Speaker's participation on Governor Newsom's recently established task force on business and jobs recovery. A UC Berkeley graduate, she lives in the Slough House area of Sacramento County and is learning to work from home with intermittent broadband service. And for that, Mary, we are so glad we can see your lovely face. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Katie, for that introduction.
Yeah, so this week has been really crazy with the legislature coming back and so many different moving parts. What's the biggest takeaway you can share with us right now?
I think the biggest takeaway is even though the Capitol building closed down in mid-March, the legislature, both members and staff, has kept working. We just aren't working in the Capitol directly. We're working from home or on webinars or Zoominars. The speaker has been coming to the Capitol during the work week. And, I think we're preparing for our members to come back both in the Assembly and Senate, which includes not only implementing health and safety protocols to ensure social distancing and the protection of members, staff, as well as the public, while also enabling the legislative and budget process to continue. Next slide, please. So many of you, if you watched our press conferences, recognize this image. It's the background for legislative press conferences, which no longer occur. All of our members are using social media or teletown halls and webinars to disseminate information to their constituents. And I can only imagine how it is at the federal level for our congressional staff counterparts. But in California, our district offices as well as Capitol offices have been responding to a deluge of calls and emails from constituents requesting assistance on issues ranging from filing unemployment insurance, navigating the SBA website, and seeking referrals to social service programs. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this week, the Assembly resumed committee hearings, and the Senate will be doing the same next week. There are opportunities for the public to present comments either in person or by telephone. And all of the legislature's meetings are streamed, and the audio and video links are accessible through our websites. So I've included our websites not only for our home pages, but also for our daily file, which is a great resource of information. It contains not only the agendas for the upcoming committee hearings, as well as the bills on file for floor hearings, but as well as contact information for members and committee offices. So the pandemic resulted in a revised, I'm sorry, could you go back? Thank you. In a revised legislative and budget schedule. You've probably heard Governor Newsom explain that our current deficit has resulted in his May revision, replacing his January budget proposal. And for those of you who aren't currently watching the Governor Newsom's, we call it Newsom at noon, I encourage you to either log on to his Instagram page or his homepage to hear his comments, as well as responses to the media every day at noon. So I defer to Jenny and Keali'I, my colleagues from the administration, to speak more in depth about what's happening perhaps with the budget and programs going forward. But just to put it in context, yesterday the Department of Finance released a fiscal update that projected a $54.3 billion deficit resulting from COVID-19. And this compares to just a $40 billion deficit during the last recession. But I'm optimistic that the legislature will pass a deadline by the constitutionally mandated June 15th deadline. And since this is the second year of the two-year session, the legislature will adjourn on August 31st. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide, please. So in order to assist with the economic recovery, we've been working with the governor's office and his administration since day one to ensure that California small business and nonprofits have information about resources and opportunities available to them and their employees. Without digressing into all of the assistance programs, please note that these helpful websites all have links to COVID-19 recovery programs. And I appreciate Tim's comments about California and sort of getting our fair share of the money for our growers. And I can tell you that Speaker Rendon, as well as Senator Pro Tem Atkins are in constant communication with the California delegation to make sure that occurs. Next slide, please. Thank you. So California, our nation, and the world are in the midst of a situation that none of us could ever have imagined. However, we are resilient, and I'm very optimistic that we will recover. This horrible pandemic has also generated, I believe, a greater appreciation for our food supply and the growers and workers who make it magically appear in our kitchens every day. And I predict that there'll be more public support for preserving production ag land and open spaces. And we can have a conversation about carbon farming in the immediate future. So I encourage you all to support your local farm stands or farmers markets. And if you're driving on the Jackson Highway, please visit Davis Ranch, which is my neighborhood farm stand and slough house. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mary. We so appreciate you taking time. And this is, unprecedented having to work from all of these different remote locations, but I think we've been able to make it feel like we're in the same room again with each other. So, best of luck, as you guys are figuring out these next days and as the Senate comes back in the following week and seeing, all that has to come. So next, I'd like to introduce Keali'I Bright, the Division Director at the California Department of Conservation, or DOC. DOC is a critical partner to AFT and in California's farmland protection efforts. More about Keali'I. He joined DOC as an Assistant Director in charge of the Division of Land Resource Protection in December of last year. And he's no stranger to the myriad of natural resources and environmental policy discussions in California. Prior to serving with DOC, Keali'I served as Deputy Secretary for Climate and Energy at the California Natural Resources Agency, where he was responsible for agency-related climate adaptation, natural and working lands, carbon management, energy and oil production, and salton sea programs. So he just had a little bit on his plate. In addition to these roles, he also served as Deputy Secretary for Legislative Affairs at the Natural Resources Agency and held several positions in the California Assembly Budget Committee, including Senior Consultant, Committee Consultant, and Committee Assistant. So thank you so much for joining us today. I did this a little bit earlier, but I want to make sure others hear this. I just wanted to compliment your agency. We participated in a webinar this week that was led by DOC, and it just feels like your agency hasn't skipped a beat at all. And you guys are certainly in a unique position to help support conservation agriculture and conservation work across California. So in that position, can you share a little bit more with us in terms of how this pandemic has the potential to impact this long-term regional conservation effort, that we participate in and many others around the table? And what are some of the things that we should be paying attention to right now with that in our context, in our front view?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Katie. And I will say I just chose not to dress up as formally as the picture that's down below me right now. So I hope nobody on that's offended by my at-home casual attire. So yeah, thank you so much for setting this meeting up. It really centers in on what a lot of the work we've been doing at the department to keep not only our work going forward in the different programs that we manage, but also trying to really understand the mechanics of, continue to understand the mechanics of the partners that we work with. For those that aren't familiar with the department, we operate multiple programs focused on ag land conservation. Those few programs provide funding for both planning grants and conservation easements, as well as newly directed funding towards acquisitions, title acquisitions. We also manage multiple programs that really go after the the conservation partner network capacity space. We have a forest and fire capacity program that is dedicated to standing up regional networks of forest and fire practitioners. And then we also have a long-standing watershed coordinator program, which is it's a wonky way to say we help fund staff at the local level in our conservation partners' offices to have enough free time to think strategically, work collaboratively, and bring the state the projects that we are trying to bring for the multitudes of watershed-related things. As you mentioned, Katie, you know, I think DOC was in a really good position when the stay-at-home orders came down, because we had been doing a lot of groundwork on setting up the systems for remote working. But I think what's been really, and there's a great story to tell, and kudos to all the staff that are that are listening and that aren't listening. But I think there's a kind of a bigger story to tell too, which obviously some state departments weren't in such good positions, and what we saw across the Natural Resources Agency was a real coordinated effort to do kind of peer-to-peer learning between agencies, so that in certain departments where you had strong practices, there's almost an immediate request to share those practices and try to stand up those successes in other agencies that were struggling with, you know, working from home, processing paper from home, etc. So I compliment the agency secretary staff and all of the departments that kind of work together to try to stand up these programs. We are, you know, like you said, we haven't missed a beat, and it's almost been kind of too much. Never quite had that moment to pause and think about things. Programs have been sticking to their timetables. We've been doing webinars, all of our meetings. We're going to be standing up site visits, really just trying to shift completely to teleworking, with the assumption that we will, you know, pretty much be changing the way we do business for the near future. I don't see us ever returning back to the exact same workplace that we left when we started the stay-at-home order. I see a pretty rapid embracing of technology. I see I see less fear coming from our control agencies around digital transactions, and I see just kind of an overall willingness to try, you know, to try new things. So we're really happy. We think this is going to push the ball forward on a lot of things that we were kind of paralyzed about beforehand. Okay, so one of the things that, you know, we've been really excited about over the last few weeks is we've been really digging into this kind of idea of what does the conservation partner network need, not only during the pandemic, but even before the pandemic. So, you know, before the pandemic, we had many challenges with climate change, with annual issues, whatever it be. We had many big goals that we wanted to achieve across, you know, agricultural policy areas and other policy areas. And, you know, if you have those challenges and you have those goals, the state relies on a broad and strong network of actors to actually achieve the goals that we're trying to set. We, as a department, do a lot of work to support the state's resource conservation districts. In our forestry programs, we have been doing some pretty exciting work around assessing the capacity of our nonprofit partners and our conservation district partners. We commissioned a study from a nonprofit partner with Oregon State University to do a statewide survey of the capacity of all of the state's forest practitioners. And I know that's not this group, but I raised it because it was a really interesting opportunity to get real data behind what we know anecdotally, which is many of these groups are sorely undercapitalized. Almost half of our forestry practitioners operate on budgets that are like $100,000 a year, and the state relies on them incredibly for all sorts of things. So, you know, we're finally getting data on what small nonprofits need and what our resource conservation districts need to be fully functioning partners. This work mirrors a lot of what we did in our land trust capacity study as well. We did a survey of land trusts in the state to understand what their needs were. And, you know, it's nice to do a report. It's nice to have it on your shelf or your virtual shelf. But I think what's important is that we're seeing this information really help guide how we shape our guidelines and how we manage our programs, because it shows where we need to push on flexibility, where we need to push on support. I've got a 1-minute warning, so I'm going to go quickly through here now. Right now, you know, we're trying to keep the network stood up. We're trying to do internal kind of organizing to help people know that there's an issue here with supporting all of you out there. But then we also are trying to figure out what's our long-term, kind of our long game. We're going to see, as Mary mentioned, just a big constriction of budget resources because of the shortfall. We know that project funding is going to decline from the state side unless there's a big effort to push, stimulus funds for the bonds or whatnot. And we're really excited about our planning grant program at the Sustainable Ag Land Conservation Program, because we think even if project funding declines right now, we think that's really important to continue to set the table for larger action when project funding moves forward. Our planning grant program in SALC has been developed so that it can be responsive to kind of all of the problems and all of the challenges that a local region is facing. We're seeing it being deployed to address, how do you build a sustainable agricultural system within Sigma, within housing crisis, within COVID-19 response. We're trying to make it as flexible of a tool as possible so that it gives people a real opportunity to provide vision for their region and really set the table for projects in the future. I will add some key dates and deadlines in the chat for the attendees to see for our programs. But with that, I just want to say that we are completely committed to supporting the network of our conservation partners. We look forward to working within our state agency with other agencies to do so, and just continue. I think for us, the most important thing for you is continue raising your challenges, your concerns, even if they are within our own programs. We need flags from you so that we can be responsive. So with that, I will turn it back to Katie. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that this was just such a great piece of the puzzle, as we're looking at this comprehensive network of what the land needs, and how our organizations can all, advocate, interplay. It's very helpful to know and to I guess take solace that organizations, within the state are looking, at this bigger, regional context, and as you mentioned here with the SALC planning grants, looking ahead, looking forward, ensuring that we're not losing sight, that we will be recovering in some way, shape, or form, and how we do that, and to be proactive in that effort. So greatly appreciate what your agency is doing. Next, I would like to introduce our good dear friend, Jenny Lester-Moffitt, who's the Undersecretary at the California Department of Agriculture, and a very busy lady as of late. Jenny's a fifth-generation California farmer and serves as the Undersecretary, where she was the Deputy Secretary from January 2015 through February 2018. Jenny engages stakeholders on issues that affect farmers and ranchers, including climate change, biodiversity, land use, water policy, and food security. Prior to joining CDFA, Jenny spent 10 years as a managing director at Dixon Ridge Farm, her family's organic walnut farm and processing operation. Growing up on the farm, Jenny learned firsthand the importance of taking care of the land and the people who farm it. She also learned the value of fostering economic growth and well-being. As a farmer and a policymaker, Jenny approaches issues that are critically important to agriculture while sustaining our environment in rural communities and economy. So thank you so much for joining us today. I know, best laid plans, right? And here we are enjoying an alfresco outdoor event.
Yeah.
So where to begin? CDFA has been a critical partner in this pandemic response, and you guys have been at the table, from the emergency onset. But you guys have been really busy too. You've been putting together, programming around creating connectivity from farmers to food banks, and can you just share like how that's going right now? How is this all coming together?
Yeah, so I'm speaking from the backyard of one of my friends, because just as we were getting ready to go on here, our power went off at home. So our internet went down, and so just like we work on broadband issues throughout the state on so many other things, even in suburban areas, we have some broadband issues sometimes as well. And so thanks, Katie, and everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here today, and enjoying this outdoors, frankly. Yeah, agriculture has played an important role in our communities, and it's been even more important now than ever. as Katie, you mentioned, I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking about food security, about keeping our workforce and our consumers safe, and then also about getting food to families that need it most, and the Farm to Families program that we just announced recently. But first on the food security, first and foremost, as at the onset of this pandemic, it was very clear that that we needed to make it abundantly apparent to everyone that agriculture is an essential critical infrastructure. And California agriculture is even more such. Our Mediterranean climate, our fertile soils, our hardworking farmers and farm workers are producing over 400 different crops. We're producing over half of the nation's fruits, nuts, and vegetables. We're the leading dairy state. California is truly leading the way, and we are truly part of that critical infrastructure, making sure that that the people who enjoy our food, the people who depend on the food that we grow, which is everyone, continue to have access to that food despite the pandemic. So what we wanted to do first, and one of the first things we did after we did do that identification, is to put out some guidance so that we're making sure that as we do stay open during this time, as agriculture continues the work it does during the pandemic, growing, producing, processing, distributing food, that we're also keeping our workforce and our consumers safe at the same time. So the work continues on our 69,000 plus farms and ranches here in California, 74% of which are family owned. But the guidelines are really important. The very first guideline, actually, before we even issued our stay-at-home order, was on food safety guidance. Guidance for folks to know that that fruits, vegetables, that produce that we're purchasing that we depend on so much for our nutrition and of course everything else, that it continues to be safe to eat. That the pandemic, that COVID, the virus is in making sure that the virus is people are not concerned about getting the virus through the food that they're purchasing. So that was the very first guidance that we put out. Quickly thereafter, we learned that of a lot of issues going on with farmers markets and the communities. Some of the communities really needed some guidance on just ensuring that those direct market channels continue to stay open, but they do so in a safe way that is protecting the people who are selling the food at the farmers market and also the people who are procuring the food. So we've gone on from there. We've worked with Cal OSHA on farm worker protection guidance. We've worked on nursery guidance, equestrian facilities, livestock markets, meat and poultry facilities. Yesterday, we put out 2 additional guidances in conjunction with the guidances that were put out yesterday for phase 2 opening that happens today. And then today we'll be also releasing UPIC and direct farm stands. So Mary, there you go. You've got some direct farm stand guidance that will be coming out for those farm stands as well. So as we want to celebrate UPIC operations and encourage people to continue to visit them, that we have guidance that makes sure that people are practicing physical distancing, that the sanitation practices, all of those different things that are comprised of in the guidances are there, and that we're being mindful of them so that we can continue to have those operations open, but we also continue to make sure that we're protecting ourselves and everyone else from those diseases, the viruses as well. We also really quickly learned that there is, because of the need for PPE in so many different industries, and agriculture has always been using PPE, and it's just part of agriculture, but that there became some really big shortages in PPE. So in partnership with the ag commissioners, we did a survey of what agriculture's needs are. We received over 1,500 responses, which is pretty remarkable in my mind, that many people responded. And I'm really pleased to announce today that based on those responses, that our OES is shipping out 2 million masks, surgical masks only, not N95. I'm sorry to say those are still not available. But 2 million surgical masks that will be going out to the county ag commissioners' offices to be distributed by the county ag commissioners. So that's very exciting news. We also are shipping out 10,000 cloth masks that will be going to migrant housing centers as well. So this is a one-time distribution to fill the gap, but an important one, I hope, in really meeting the need. One thing I just want to say is that, this pandemic has just been sobering. The debilitating nature of the virus has taken a toll on our people, on our families, on our communities, our health, and our economy. And we've been working as an administration in overdrive with our legislature, of course, on trying to minimize that impact. So for CDFA, that means things like partnering with Caltrans and with DMV on freight issues and DMV license issues for H-2A workers, childcare, ensuring that our critical infrastructure workers have childcare access for their kids, healthcare, sick leave, opening up our fairgrounds for emergency care, housing for the homeless, testing it for urban and rural communities, working with our federal partners on securing federal dollars for our communities. So we do have a whole webpage of resources that have our guidance documents and so many more. And so I'll put that on there. But our work continues. Our Climate Smart Ag programs continue. We've to date received, 422 applications for $28.6 million for our Healthy Soils program and $6 million in requests for demonstration projects. So we have $25 million total, and we're continuing to receive applications as we go. And this is really important because now more than ever, as Mary talked about with the announcement yesterday with our budget shortfall, that we need to do more with less, and conservation is just about that. It's all about doing more with less. We're entering these difficult times, and we need to continue to produce food and fiber, continuing to do that with less. I want to spend a little bit of time, and I don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to spend time talking about the Farm to Family announcement. 2 months ago, when we shut down the economy, at that same time, 50% of the food goes to restaurants, wholesalers, food service, those sorts of things. Over a 5-day period, 30 million meals at school lunches, 15 million breakfasts, 100 million restaurants, every day stop being served. This caused upheaval and a dramatic impact to our fresh produce, our dairy, our flour, our beef, our wine, and so many other supply chains. And at the same time, our food banks have seen just an incredible need. Food banks are seeing a 73% increase in demand over this time last year. So last week, the governor, along with the secretary, announced our Farm to Family program. It's an initiative where we have secured a little over $3.6 million in federal funding. Some of that comes from our specialty crop block grant dollars, as well as a new Farm Bill program called Farm to Food Banks. Another part comes from philanthropy and really starting to raise some funding through philanthropy as well. Our goal is to raise $15 million, and in partnership with a lot in philanthropy and the work that we're doing, we expect to raise that throughout the end of the year. But we're also asking farmers to step up and to continue to donate food as they always have been. In fact, farmers have stepped up in a big way already in the month of April, donating more than 20 million pounds of produce that was otherwise going to be tilled in to the food banks. It's just remarkable and just commendable that Ag continues to step up and support our communities in that way. Since our announcement, we received another 200 calls from Ag interested in that as well. So the Farm to Family program is a really big one. We're going to be doing some webinars for folks about how they can participate in Farm to Family. We're also really sharing information on social media through a social media campaign called Farmers Feed the Need. I think that's so important because now more than ever, we need to do all we can to ensure that all Californians have access to the healthy California grown products that we have. There's never been a time that I can recall growing up as a farm girl that there has been so much attention on how our food is grown and how our food gets to where we eat it. And I think this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to really look at our food system and build a food system and rebuild our food system in a way that is smart, strategic, and equitable. This is our chance to show everyone how California is so special in what we grow, how we grow it, and of course, the great farmers and farm workers who grow it every day. So thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Well, thank you so much for those thoughts, Jenny. And, such an incredible perspective that, while we're in the midst of this, there still is that silver lining that this is an opportunity, to address, this food system in a major way. So thank you for that. And thank you for, to the Secretary as well for all of the leadership that's being exhibited and how you and your agency are looking at, the needs of people, from multiple different angles. You guys are looking at worker protection, you're looking at food safety, you're looking at, conservation work. So to really, have a department that looks at, all of these different, aspects of agriculture and understand it is very helpful. Thank you for that. So moving us forward, because we do want to preserve some time for questions as well, but we don't want to short our next speaker, is Cannon Michael. He's the president and CEO of Bulls Farming Company. Cannon's the president and CEO, as I mentioned, and is a sixth generation farmer and family member to work in the farming business. As a graduate of UC Berkeley, Cannon joined the company in 1998, rising to the rank of president and CEO in 2014, after his uncle, Philip Bulls, retired. For those of you who are familiar with Cannon, he's an ardent advocate for California agriculture and intelligent water policy. Environmental stewardship, ethical treatment of workers, and sustainable production are all extremely important to Cannon and the team at Bulls Farming. In addition, AFT has the fortunate position of having Cannon serve on our national board. So thank you again for joining us. It's really important that we ensure, when we can have these conversations, that we're looking kind of, through different aspects of our system. And you most certainly represent the reason we're here in so many ways, and having a farmer, that can talk to us about what the experience looks like on the ground level. So, from your perspective, can you share what it's like to be a farmer in California during this pandemic, and what are some of the things that are keeping you up at night?
Well, thank you for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on with everybody. Great group of panelists. I would say before the outbreak and the pandemic that's hit, there's a lot of things that keep California farmers up at night. I think some of the previous folks have talked about some of the regulatory things that we face in California, number of protections for the environment and for workers and water quality, air quality, all things that are very positive, and things that our voting, public has put the legislators in place that have crafted these regulations. But the truth is that a lot of the other places where we're getting a lot of our food don't have that same set of regulations. So just starting right off the bat, the California farmer often faces additional challenges that other places don't. And not to say that they're not good things to have, but when it comes to being competitive, it does put a bit of a strain on us sometimes. So with that in mind, we also have a tough water year in California this year. We had not the expected rainfall that we would normally see, a lot of southern storms. So large areas of the state only have 15% water allocations, and then even senior water rights have been cut back recently. So on top of everything else, California is a complex place to do business, not just for agriculture, but for many other industries. And again, it's always, agriculture always represents some amount of challenge, but certainly the pandemic has definitely added a new layer of complexity that I don't think any of us really wanted. I know right from the offset, our primary focus was keeping our workforce healthy, and I would broadly define health as not just the folks being able to show up to do their jobs in the fields, which obviously is important because a farm can't function without that, but many of our people, I would define health for them as financial and emotional and all the other things that a pandemic like this can expose. And so with a lot of the workers that we have, they're both spouses or partners work. So some of those folks who aren't in agriculture were laid off, and then there was childcare thrust back upon them. And so again, it was really sort of the heightened the idea of worker health. And then also we're coming into a period right now where we have a lot of planting decisions that are happening, and just harvest activities that are right around the corner. And so again, without a healthy workforce, we can't execute any of the things that we need to do here on the farm. So, you know, our educational efforts that we did, providing proper equipment, you know, taking our break room apart in terms of moving things so nobody could really congregate. I mean, we instantly took whatever steps we could. I think our industry groups did a pretty good job of getting out information in terms of in multiple languages to help us with the educational efforts that we were trying to put forward to keep people healthy and distant and all those things. And so it was kind of that was our first priority, and then really starting to look into a food system that has never seen this kind of disruption. And for us, there's always a certain amount of risk, I think, with a number of the crops that we grow. But we sort of built this on-demand food system. So, I mean, many people say like, oh, why is there a problem? Because everybody's still eating, and you know, it's not any different really. But on the food service and the commercial side, the collapse really of that demand just highlights for me that we have created a system where, you know, you can be almost anywhere in California, you know, some of the least populated areas, and you know, you could pull up to a Subway to get a sandwich, and nobody's ever going to say like they don't have lettuce or they don't have onions or they don't have tomatoes. So just that on-demand aspect. And then of course, you know, you walk into a hotel in San Francisco and they're going to have all different kinds of salads and milk and all those things that we just expect. So while those folks do a really good job of sourcing products and knowing what they need to have on hand, I think to me it exposes that there probably is a certain amount of additional waste that goes on. And then when that system completely shuts down, that demand, there's just no way for the system to absorb all additional food that comes back. So pricing for us, some commodities look okay. Some crops seem like they're going to be fine. Other things where we're very price exposed on certain melon crops like watermelons and cantaloupes, you know, we're making planting decisions now that we really have no idea what that market's going to look like in you know, 60 to 80 to 100 days. But yet we had to make decisions back in, you know, November, December to buy seed, to put the seed in the greenhouse. To, you know, the trajectory for farms is often set well before you know, the planting actually happens, and so there's not many ways to pivot. And so we've been trying to do what we're asked to do as an essential industry, which is to keep pushing forward and keep working and keep producing. But again, while there's always a certain amount of market risk, I think this year we're much more exposed than what we normally would be, because we've seen very different buying behavior. And even from one week to the next, you're seeing, you know, chicken price go high, chicken price go low. You know, you're just seeing very, very erratic movements in the market. And so a lot of risk, a lot of exposure. You know, Tim talked a little bit about some potential programs. You know, the PPP, the Paycheck Protection. You know, to me, ag is the perfect candidate as an essential business and continuing to employ our people. But yet you've seen a lot of potential blowback. You've seen a lot of potential rule changes. You've seen a lot of clarification. So it's really not clear that that's going to be helpful. Actually, could be damaging if people have a negative impression of people who take that money. So again, I don't think to me, I haven't seen a really effective response at this point. You know, I think we don't, for a lot of the crops that we grow in terms of fresh vegetables, there's not a lot of support programs in terms of insurance and some of the other things that a lot of the large scale commodity crops have much more access to. So again, I think it begs to have a larger conversation, and I think Jenny alluded to some of that about how people maybe understand a little bit more about where their food is coming from and who's producing it. So hopefully we can have those conversations. I know people going in to supermarkets and seeing shelves empty has been something that's been a shock to a lot of people's systems. And so again, I think the time is right to have certain conversations. And I think you know, the food waste issue to me is a big one that we continue to work on. We've been working on it for years here on the farm. It really just boils down to finding the funding to help us get the product out of the field. So pandemic or no pandemic, we have food waste issues in this country that need to be looked at. We have people who are desperately in need of safe, reliable, affordable, local, nutritious food, and often sometimes with market disruption, the farmer can't make the economic decision to get the food out of the fields. And so anyway, I can go on, and I know we wanted to get to some questions, so I don't want to take all the time, but it's an incredibly nuanced and complex issue. It deserves a lot of good conversation, and ultimately, my hope out of this is that people do connect to the idea that your dollar as a consumer really drives behavior, and to have a group of agriculturalists like you have in California that we don't do everything perfectly, I would say, but we're held to a very high standard, and we're held to a standard that also includes enforceable penalties if we do something wrong. So I hope people, now that they're cooking at home and doing different things, will think more about seasonality and buying local, and some of the things that we've kind of destroyed with the food system that we have has kind of disconnected people from a lot of that. So I look at this as a potential opportunity, and again, I don't want to go on and monopolize all the time, but I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to any questions.
Super. Thank you so much, Cannon. Such an important way to be thinking about things, especially the food waste component. And there certainly is room for more work in that area. So thank you for highlighting that. Right now, I'm going to kind of switch gears here. We do want to get to a few questions, and I'm going to transition and drop off camera here, and I'm going to introduce Lauren Bernadette, our California Policy Associate with AFT. She's been the maven in the background, keeping things moving. So Lauren, you care to share some of the questions that we've been hearing online?
Hi, everyone. I think I'm off mute now. So Jenny, we got a couple of questions for you. And the first one that I want to start is I understand there is a bill to allow on-farm slaughter of sheep, goats, and hogs to supplement the current allowance for only beef. That would help our local producers provide more food security for their neighbors and other customers. How is that bill looking? And do you expect it to make it through? Is there a timeline for it? Thanks. And so this question also seems relevant for Mary. So Mary, if you want to hop in and help Jenny to supplement any of the answer, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I actually might move this more to Mary to talk more about the legislative process this year, since it is clearly truncated because of the pause that you guys had to make, as well as just the changes for social distancing that you guys have in the chambers. So maybe if you wouldn't talk just generally probably about policy bills and what that process might look like, would that be helpful? Mary?
Sorry, we have a delay here. So I don't know, it would be helpful for us, and the individual can email me and Jenny. If I don't know if this is an assembly bill or a Senate bill that has yet to pass out of committee that is heading, or off the Senate floor heading over to the assembly. I think with respect to the Assembly Ag Committee, if the bill is not related to the pandemic or, COVID-19 relief, that it's not going to be heard this session. That's been the decision of the chair. And I hope I'm somewhat answering the question, but I think I just need a little bit more information. And is this a California bill, or is this a congressional bill, federal legislation?
It is a California bill for the legislature, and it would be directing our department. But yeah, I think it would be good to follow up with this more. So if you guys could email Mary and I, that would be great.
And we let our attendees know in chat that we will be pushing out some post-webinar materials to answer further questions that people have. So we can work on further answers in that too, if it's helpful. So one more question, and we're right up against 2:30. So I think this will be the last one. And it's another question for Jenny. So Jenny, is farm to family structured to pay farmers for their products, at least at cost. And the commenter said, I don't think this is fair to many farmers who need reliable markets.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And Farm to Family is really about taking food that would otherwise have not had a market, so food that is going to waste or be tilled in, and getting that food picked, packed, and shipped to food banks. So there is a nominal payment for that. It's anywhere from, it's up to 15 cents a pound, and it's really just to cover the harvest cost. There is also, the donors may also qualify for a 15% tax credit as well for the portion that they've donated. I think that gets to the next question, which is really about rethinking, as we're thinking through all sorts of things in the food system, local food systems, direct market, those sorts of things. It's also, we've had an incredible need for hunger programs, for feeding programs, for beyond, far before this, and really starting to think through the markets and how do we make growers whole, and how do we make the food banks whole as well, and think through those markets and how do we support that, and what does a market system look like for food banks. I know there's been a lot of conversations on that, making sure that we can not just do this program now, but really think through a real marketing program, a real program for growers, so that growers get paid the full amount for their product. So look forward to future conversations on that for sure.
Great, thank you for that. And we do have more questions, but we will answer those in materials that we will send to our attendees after the webinar. And with that, I will turn it back over to Katie. Thank you.
Great. And one of our questions is from Steve Schaefer, a friend of AFT and a former friend of CDFA. So we'll make sure that we answer you, Steve. I don't want you to think we're ignoring you, but we are up against some time here. So really, let me move my questions out of my way so I can see where we are. Here we go. So really in closing, just all of you, all of our fantastic speakers that have taken time to do all the back end preparation, who have jumped through hurdles and fire and everything else to get into their internet connection. We so appreciate everything you guys have done to be a part of this conversation and to really just take the snapshot in time and where we are in this pandemic, and the questions that are being asked, the things that we can kind of resolve ourselves to now having perspective to kind of look back but also look forward. We certainly aren't out of this yet. We aren't able to just wave the wand and go to this next level of recovery, but I think that we are incrementally making our way through this, and we are starting to find some areas of coalescing in need, and really looking at that needs assessment. And so each of you in all of the different roles that you serve here in this California agricultural food system, we so appreciate the hard work that you're doing in and out of your daily tasks, and those that have kind of been added to your plate during this pandemic too. I think that's been kind of the excess, right? We still have these other things, Keali'I shop still, humming along, healthy soils programs are still humming along. The tractors are still in the fields doing what they need to do, but there's all this extra. So, wishing you guys all great health and perspective, and, however we can, continue to share your voice and messages in this pandemic, and as we see our way through it. We offer ourselves up in that way. And to all of you that are out there, that have been taking in this information, we also serve as a resource to you and a collaborator, and we hope to get to these questions and hope that we can help each other in this as we move forward. So thank you so much. May all of you stay in good health, and this concludes our webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.